You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I told you at the top of the show, like Marvel Comics has nothing on us. This is a show that's filled with superheroes. And Simon Rosenberg is certainly one of them. A political strategist, an entrepreneur, a writer. He's proven to have a great eye for talent and an ability to nurture and train a generation of folks who've gone on to play important roles in campaigns, in government, in many organizations that help shape public dialogue. He founded NDN, a progressive think tank that has had an outsized impact for the last few years, and recently announced he's winding that down. Most importantly, in a world of certainties and sound bites, this is a man who is not afraid to think. Simon, welcome.
Edwin, thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction.
No, I've admired your work for many years. We actually both worked on the Clinton campaign in '91, but I don't think our paths crossed, and I'm really pleased to meet you now.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks for what you do.
Well, look, we spent a lot of time on this show talking about the difference and the intersection between governing and politics. Mm-hmm. Today's GOP doesn't really think about governing. They think about politics. You have some constraints when you also try and do the hard work of governing. But you've spent decades in that intersection between the two. Yeah. And I think understanding that intersection and understanding how they work together has been part of expanding the Democratic base over the years. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you're making. Politics, and you're right about what's happened to the Republican Party. I mean, essentially, it's all performative politics now. It isn't really about governing. I mean, I often say that the way to think about the Republicans now is that they're basing their politics on this false story that they're telling every day about the Democrats, that we're radical left, we're woke, we're communist, socialist, whatever the attack of the day is. They even started calling it satanic a few weeks ago, and that they have to maintain this fiction that we are this evil, dangerous group of people. Therefore, the right is then justified in doing whatever they can, using whatever tools they have to make sure that we don't move our politics forward. And that false narrative and that false story that they tell essentially has become their entire politics. They don't really do much else other than continuing to try to, it's like a thing they've built that is falling down every day, that they have to rebuild it and to keep it going, to keep this sort of base, this incredibly false and wrong story they're telling the American people about who we are as a country and who we are as Democrats. And so I do think that Democrats and Joe Biden, as you know, he's sort of a workhorse, not a show horse, right? He puts his head down every day and does the work. He had an incredibly productive first 2 years as president. The country's clearly far better off today because of him. And we have to do both, though. We've got to be able to govern well and tell our story effectively if we want to be successful. And I think we have work to do in the next year and a half about telling our story.
Yeah, I struggle every week on this show with how to talk about the moment we're in, how to be true to the values I hold and the determination to stick with facts, to think and not just to opine. And I struggle with how to do this against sort of oncoming, I don't know what to call it, medieval race-based cultist mindset that's coming at us. I think you cited that struggle as one of the reasons why you're stepping back from NDN and moving on to a new direction.
Yeah, I mean, if people get a chance to read the Atlantic, Ron Brownstein's interview with me in the Atlantic, it was really a wonderful interview. I've known Edwin since 1992. We've been friends for a long time. We've had many conversations over the years about American politics, and
it's a good piece.
I think it's a good piece, and we covered a lot of ground. And yeah, look, the reason I'm winding down this organization that I began in 1996 is because NDN was built in a completely different political era, and it was built to achieve certain things that have been either largely achieved or time has moved on, and we need to now do things differently. We have new challenges ahead of us, and to me, there are sort of three basic sets of things that make this coming political age different from the age that we just, went through as a country and as Democrats. And one is that the governing challenges we have now are different. We really have to make sure the planet doesn't warm. We have to make sure that democracy prevails here and abroad. And I think these become overarching priorities for us in a way that they weren't 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Second is it's the thing we're talking about, which is the information ecosystem that we're living in is changing so much. I think the social media age was bad for the United States, was bad for the world. I think it's been, bad for young Americans. It's just been a bad experience for us. We are moving, I think, into a post-social media age. Democrats have to acknowledge and recognize these changes that are happening in the way that we communicate and build a new politics around this. I think that the other piece of that is that we have to also acknowledge the information superiority of the right. The Republicans are just much louder than we are, and they're not better than we are, but they're louder, and we have to get louder. And I know you had Tara McGowan on earlier, somebody who I've been working with quite a bit, who's, I think, one of the most important young leaders and building institutions that are going to help us get louder. And then the third piece is I think we still, domestically, our politics is changing. MAGA has changed everything, right? We're not in a Republican-Democratic debate anymore. We're up against extremists who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal to gain power. It's a serious matter, and I think that we have to organize our politics differently than we did before. So my organization that I built all those years ago just wasn't suited to do these things. And so I'm going to reorganize my work over the next few months, and I'm going to be launching a Substack this week, which is, if you don't know about it, it's a place where writers and thinkers go. It's going to be my primary home. NDN's been my primary home for 27 years. This new Substack I have is going to be my primary home, and so everyone can join me there if you can.
What's it going to be called?
And I think I don't know yet, and it's launching Tuesday. You can, if you follow me on Twitter at Simon WDC, but also if you just search Simon Rosenberg, it will come up. And we're still working out all the final details, and I don't want to wink and nod one way or the other. We've got it's down to 2 names, and we'll see on Tuesday. I'm working on that this weekend. But anyway, the bottom line is, look, I think we're going through big changes, and I'm going to be organizing myself to sort of do these, to engage in these battles in a different way than I was before.
They're so important. By the way, I write on Substack too, called "It's the Democracy, Stupid." But yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. The things that you mentioned, they're so important. They argue. We just passed the first round of a mayoral election in Chicago, and now there are 2 candidates, and they are the most edgy, the most left and the most right are the 2 that survived to where we are. And I'm not going to make any friends in Chicago by telling my fellow Democrats that this is not the battle between good and evil, that there actually is, one in the country, and it isn't this. The things that you're talking about, saving the democracy, paying attention to the things we need to do on climate change, and they're related because of the corruption of money in our democracy, and so much of it is fossil fuel based. That we really have to stay focused on the most important issues for the next few years and not allow ourselves to be dragged into our usual small fights.
It's not just small fights, Edwin. I think that, first of all, yes. I mean, part of what my role has been for a long time is to say, hey, there are these things that we have to do. There are a lot of things we can do, but there are a few things that we have to do. And if we're going to be successful, the country's going to be successful, and to stay focused on the things that matter most. It doesn't mean that there are a lot of other things that don't matter, but there are things that matter more, right? I think we can say that, and I think the things I've laid out are the things that if we don't get these things right, then a lot of the other things that we care about won't matter very much, right? And the second thing, though, you talk about sort of the attitude of Democrats and sort of who we are, and I think something really important happened in 2021 and 2022 where we got down on ourselves, we got down on Biden, we got pessimistic as a family, we were fighting with each other, and we just don't have the luxury to do that, right? I mean, I think one of the learnings that I have, and you're in the media business, is that a lot of what MAGA does is to put negative sentiment into our discourse. They want us to feel bad about our leaders, our country, our democracy, each other, our institutions, everything. They want us to feel bad about it. And I think that part of the way we're going to defeat MAGA is that we have to become more conscious about putting positive sentiment into the discourse, telling the good stories about the greatness of this country and the great things that we still can do, to not allow their negative sentiment and their talking down America to dominate our discourse. If they talk it down, we got to talk it up, right? We need to spend more time putting positive sentiment into our discourse. And we can't be sort of perpetually disappointed, perpetually angry and frustrated that the perfect thing that we all wanted didn't happen. It's just not the nature of our business, right? And I think we got too caught up a little bit in the last couple of years about the perfect and not the good. And we have to be careful to not allow that to happen again, because that's when they win, right? When we get down on ourselves and lose faith in ourselves and lose faith in our country is when they're going to defeat us. And if we lose at this point, right, losing means that, we may not have the same democracy that we all want to have. And so the stakes in these things that we're talking about are very high. And I just want to say that I am very grateful to be a Democrat. I'm very grateful to be living here in the United States. We are the greatest country in the world. We're the best political party America's ever produced. There's a lot we should be celebrating, and we have to get more comfortable about doing that as Democrats, I think, if we're going to be more successful than we are now.
Yeah, the fight, in the most remarkable Congress since the 1960s, for sure, the 117th Congress, they got such stuff done. But for a year, there was a very public fight about what that would be, and it was damaging, really damaging to us.
And it was self-indulgent, and it was self-indulgent to some degree as well. I mean, I think it is. We can debate, we can disagree without being disagreeable. We can't fight, right? Like, we have to debate, we have to argue, it can't become fighting, right? Because when the center left splits is when far right parties are successful. And we know this from history. We know this from what's happening around the world right now.
Yep.
I mean, the new government in Italy only got 25% of the vote, or I think it was 25%. So we've got to stick together, as hard as that is sometimes. Is that we have to be very conscious about sticking together. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about this, and I think you are part of why. I mean, I just think about what happened since Donald Trump was elected, since that enormous women's march all over the country. We've seen wonderful organizations, whether it's Tara McGowan's Courier Newsroom or Demcast, to get ideas out, or Swing Left. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of organizations and revitalized Democratic Party organizations around the country that have given such on-ramps to Americans to get back involved in civic life. And when they get back involved, it turns out they get involved in their local communities, because that's where this takes place. And it's a rebuilding of the fabric of our civic life that I see going on precisely because of the MAGA threat that makes me an optimist.
Well, listen, I think this is really important about what you're saying, and I don't think there's nearly enough attention to it being given to it, which is that during the combination of Hillary's loss and Trump's rise and the growth of MAGA and then COVID happening, there's been a new era of activism in the Democratic Party. Our campaigns are raising 3, 4, 5 times more money than they were raising, 10 years ago. The number, people, as you know, I'm sure you have friends, right? You can live in Illinois and still text and make phone calls into Michigan and Wisconsin, into battleground states.
Everybody I know.
Yep. Everybody you know is doing it, right? This has become a phenomenon. And what we've had is that we now have the most powerful muscular grassroots that I think we've ever had since I've been in this business in 30 years doing this. Millions of people are getting up every day, thinking of themselves as activists. They're attending Zooms with, I do all these Zooms with groups all over the country. hundreds of people come. You can now make dinner and participate in a Zoom with a senator or a congressman. Zoom has been a very powerful thing because it's allowed these communities to grow. I mean, some of these were book groups that then just got 20 of their friends and they got 20 of their friends, and they've grown into these things with thousands of people who are raising. I spoke to a group in Massachusetts that's raised $15 million over the last 3 elections for Democratic candidates. Hundreds of people, they interview candidates, they're very deliberate about what they do. This kind of very de Tocquevillian kind of, local bottom-up organizations that have happened, which have been enabled by Demcast and Swing Left and Indivisible, has really made us strong and muscular and powerful. And it's something that I just don't think is getting nearly enough attention. And it's one of the reasons we did so well in the election, right, is that, where we were able to, in the blue state, in the battleground states where we ran these big campaigns because of all the passion of our proud patriots giving all this money. We had people texting in, right, from Illinois, right, into the battleground, right, writing their postcards. We actually did better in 2022 in most of the major battleground states than we did in 2020. That's an incredible achievement. But the lesson, the admonition is where we didn't have these big campaigns, we fell back. And it's why
New York and California,
a lot of New York, California, Texas, and Florida. And part of what I'm talking about now is that we not only have to celebrate and acknowledge and understand how important it is to have these big campaigns, but we need to now become information warriors. We need to be involved in the daily debate every day, get louder as a family, because they still are louder than we are. And I think we're going to sort of cut into their loudness in 2 ways, right? One is through organizations like Terrace, and Resolute Square and Midas Touch, and you, Edwin, for what you're doing. We have people who are out there institutionally moving us forward. But I think private citizens can do more too. I mean, I'd like to think of the War Room, back when we met all those years ago. I'd like to think of the War Room not as 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, but 4 million people getting up every day, pushing messages through their networks, being networked and amplified, and being loud together. And I think it's something we can all do in our daily lives. You want to be loud. You don't want to be annoying, right? Don't want to be annoying, but we can all be loud. And I think together, we can cut into some of those advantages that Republicans have.
That's a really important point. And it goes to, in the end, this sense that we can't wait for the refs. We have to do it ourselves. People have said, I see something going on. It's not right. Somebody's going to come and tell them they're wrong, and it'll be okay. And nobody's going to come and tell them they're wrong. We have to do it ourselves. That's what a democracy is. And I think people are waking up to that. And I can't wait to see what you do on Substack. It will be part of that huge effort to give everybody the information they need to share, to make part of their networks, to, as you say, be loud.
Yeah, listen, I think with the ending of what Twitter was, whatever Twitter becomes, we're in a period where there's got to be incredible experimentation in the way that we communicate and the way that we tell our story. I think the media around us is changing. I mean, groups like Midas Touch, Midas Touch now, which is a group that was just founded a few years ago, 3 brothers in Los Angeles, they're now getting as many views on the internet every day as MSNBC and CNN. I mean, they've become a major media property in just a few years. And I think, again, the combination of Zoom, which has moved a lot of our politics to video, into audio and video, right? We've seen a huge increase in podcasts. We have so much, the way that we all are getting our information and talking to each other is changing. And I think we all have to recognize that Twitter, it's going to be very difficult for the Democratic family to stay on Twitter much longer because of what Elon's doing. And there's an urgency to really try to accelerate the development of these other options for us to give us and to learn how to use these things, which is one of the reasons I'm diving into this. I've created a YouTube channel just a few months ago. I'm now producing regular video content. I'm now going to go on Substack. I working for a 501c4 organization was very limiting in terms of what I could talk about and what I could do. I needed to be able to operate differently, and that's what I'm doing now with my own career.
So I'm fascinated. I can't wait to see this next step of yours. I want to go back to an old part of your life, an older part of the life, and talk about just why it's so important that you've done what you've done. For a year leading up to the midterms, Tom Bonnier came on my show with some regularity, and we would talk about the data and what it means. And I would wonder whether the upcoming election would differ from every other, because it wasn't just a referendum on the incumbent, but it seemed like a referendum on the revanchist right. And then Dobbs happened, right? And Tom often came on and talked about your work, and tried to tell everybody that the red wave was BS. But I mean, this is why I raise it, because even though it was BS, and you guys pointed that out, Democrats still took it seriously enough to move resources to places they didn't need to move them, and it may have cost us, the worst senator in the United States, Ron Johnson. Right?
I think you and I agree that Ron Johnson is the worst senator in the United States. So I appreciate that even being voiced today. Listen, I think the story of the red wave, and Tom and I, were partners in this effort last year, was really a kind of an amazing thing that happened. I mean, as you pointed out, as thinking people, essentially the entire national media got the election wrong, and they didn't just get it wrong. The red wave was the opposite of what happened in the election. It wasn't just a miss. Because the red wave meant high Republican intensity and low Democratic intensity. And frankly, what happened was sort of the opposite of that, right? Which is that we outperformed expectations and they underperformed expectations. So this wasn't a small thing that happened. It was a big thing that happened. And it gets to this part of the story that I'm trying to tell, that I do think we're going through a change in the way that information moves, the way that we communicate with each other. I don't exactly know how this all is going to go. I feel like we're in a period of transition, but the legacy media, as it's called, really had their worst election performance ever in 2022. And there's been virtually no self-reflection about it. There's been no discussion about, well, what did we learn? How do we make sure we don't make those mistakes again? The New York Times, to their credit, did do this big investigative piece about the red wave and what happened to the red wave, because I think they felt they'd been burned in some of their own reporting, by Republicans who had, told them, falsehoods. I mean, one of the things I kept telling reporters during this battle with the red wave was that, they just spent the last 2 years lying about the last election. Why don't you think they could be lying about this one? Right. And that the notion that why are you taking anything they're telling you at face value? Right. And this isn't the same Republican Party that you were covering 20 years ago. And so the Republicans manufactured through creating these false polls, this perception that the election was moving towards them. Tom and I were challenging that data, with publicly available data, right, saying that we weren't seeing this in the data that we had. And we stuck to our guns and said we thought it was going to be a close competitive election. What was, I think, disappointing and should be disappointing to all of your listeners is that prominent people that you watch on TV all the time, that we all trust to give us information about American politics, looked at what we were doing and said we were wrong. I mean, Tom and I were attacked by Nate Silver. We were called, I was called a conspiracy theorist by a prominent MSNBC commentator. The Cook Report said I was putting out astrology, not analysis. And so the media group, when I sort of threw it in everybody's face 10 days before the election and said, what are you guys doing? You're falling for this Republican BS. They attacked us. And
I remember.
And really, and it was incredibly disappointing to me. And I went on Joy Reid's show and I called out the commentariat, as I call it. And so, but there's been no reflection on this. And it gets to this basic point that the Republicans' capacity to move false arguments into the daily discourse is a major thing in it's a major challenge that we have in our country. Because if you're a media and you see four other people saying red wave, red wave, red wave, then you just jump on red wave, red wave. And that was all a manufactured false story in the way that fentanyl.
Well, thinking is hard.
False. Yeah,
thinking is hard.
And and they've become, they have become unmoored from any kind of moral obligation to be involved in a politics that makes things better. And so the level of manipulation, the level of gamesmanship, the level of BS has escalated. And this is why we have to get much more serious. That's why I'm on this show today, right?
Yeah.
We have to get much more serious about countering the information superiority that the Republicans have. We will not be where we want to be as a national party and as a ideological movement unless we get louder in the coming years.
As a democracy, if we get louder.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, the democracy will go. And there are consequences to these lies. And it isn't just that you got treated badly. I'm sorry that happened. It's terrible that you got treated badly. But in fact, Democrats moved resources to California and other places where they didn't need to move them, and we lost Wisconsin. Right? I mean, there are actual consequences to that lie that made a difference in our electoral politics.
There's no question. The TCCC believes that we lost the House because of this. Because what happened was that there were national donors that they were counting on to put money in at the end of the election who passed and put money in other places. And we only lost the House by 5 seats, a few thousand votes and 5 seats.
Yeah.
And so I think it really was consequential. There's no question about it.
Yeah. Well, all right. So saving democracy, big concern. We've spent almost all our time about that. Do you want to, in the minute you have left, talk about your thinking about climate change?
Well, let me just close with this, if we got a minute. I want to just come back to this idea that we have more power than we understand, that we have more agency than we're led to believe, that all of you who are listening today are acting like big citizens for even listening to this show. But I need you to not only do the texting and the phone calls and the money that you're raising. We need to become information warriors together. We need to get louder. This is a huge, urgent priority. And for all of us, and Edwin, that's what you're doing with this show, right? Like you're just doing it in the real world.
Yep.
And stay connected and spread. I try to release a lot of what I release in old NDN and now my new world is I try to provide daily information that people can use to be, better at making arguments for advancing our politics. And so develop resources, pick an issue, become expert in it, right? Engage in the discourse. It really matters. We can do this, but you can't score unless you shoot, right? Like we're only going to do it if we try, and we have to stop saying, well, why isn't the DNC doing it? And why isn't Biden do it? What are you doing, right? What are we doing? And I think we have more power than we understand. It's part of what you were getting at with these grassroots groups. Part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is I've been so inspired by the citizen activism that I've seen, the passion, the patriotism, the love of country that I've come across. And I feel obligated to continue to work with these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that I've been working with to make sure, because we got another election ahead of us, and we've got to win that one the way that, we've done really well in the last 3, but we got another one we have to do just as well at in 2024.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Simon. I'm so appreciative of this time together. I hope we can do it again. And I hope once your Substack is launched, we can devote some time to it here and make these connections even bigger. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Edwin, thank you. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Yep. You too. All right, everybody. That was Simon Rosenberg, remarkable among these superheroes that are on today. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, this unique position of Secretary of State and its role in preserving, protecting our democracy by making sure our elections are free and fair and open. This doesn't happen by accident, and Kim Rogers, who is the Executive Director of Dems of State, is going to join us after this break.